Welcome to Exit Interview. I'm your host, Ify Walker. Today, I'm joined by Kanya Balakrishna, co-founder and CEO of the Future Project and Future Coach. This story is about a pivot and what happens next. I wanted to bring you Kanya's story because not all exits or pivots involve leaving. Sometimes an exit looks more like a substantial change, and it also looks like going through the work twisties. I'm grateful for Kanya's contributions and her candor. Okay, so Kanya, welcome to Exit Interview. It is a delight to have you. I want to jump right in, and I want to understand, what do we have to know about how you grew up to help us understand the leader that you are today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is, I've been excited about this conversation for a long time. So I think, the maybe most defining thing about my childhood actually was change. So, I was born in South Korea, and then moved to Japan when I was just a couple months old, and lived there until I was 6, and then moved to the U.S. And even once we moved here, I, went to, I think, 8 or 9 different schools in my 12 years of school. We started out in Southern California and ended up moving to Tennessee, which was a very big shift when I was, I think, 12. So at a very sort of pivotal moment in my life. And so I think a lot of what defined me or shaped my experiences growing up was this constant necessity to redefine, reestablish myself, and in different communities, in different places, and kind of find what I wanted to do, what I could find to ground me, whether it was people, friends, or activities, or eventually organizations or clubs, or like academic pursuits. It was kind of a constant a constant journey to figure out how and who I was and how I wanted to show up in all of these different places. And I was very fortunate throughout all this that, even though there were ups and downs, and my parents, first generation immigrants, we were like working hard to make things work for our family. I was very lucky to have the stability of family sort of underlying all of this, with my parents and my sisters. And so while I had some things that were very grounding, there was also just a lot of change and evolution that sort of marked my growing up years. And I think in hindsight, that's helped me to become a very adaptable person and leader, and somebody who tries to figure out, what's the best and highest contribution I can make, and all that. But it also, I think, as I've sort of learned through my adult years in particular, there's a lot of, I think, challenge there's a lot that I sort of was challenged or struggled with throughout that time around, being liked, and finding ways to, make friends quickly. And, so there are good and bad things, of course, and challenges and opportunities that come from, that much change and evolution. But at the end of the day, like, I think, I feel grateful that a childhood like that not only exposed me to a lot of different environments and people and cultures and ways of living, but also helped me to have confidence, that I could figure things out and find ways to adapt no matter what the circumstances were.
How did that lead to confidence, Kanya? Because you could imagine a world where that much change and having to sort of reassert yourself, reestablish who you are in different communities,
Yeah.
would actually lead to someone feeling the exact opposite and actually not having a lot of confidence. So where did that come from? And who told you it was okay to sort of show up in the world with that kind of
Yeah.
confidence?
That's a beautiful question. Because actually, when you ask it, I realized that I don't think that confidence really came probably until about high school, which is sometimes a funny time to find confidence. I know I work with young people, and high school is a trying time. And I'm not saying I felt confidence necessarily all the time while I was in high school, but I think, I ended up getting a scholarship to go to a small school. And that gave me, after, it took a little while. It took like, at least the first year of sort of acclimating and finding some friends and all that. But I think, I was in Memphis, Tennessee, and I think that what I was able to do during those years was explore, have kind of freedom and like the support of my parents in particular, but also a handful of really excellent teachers who did this for others, not just me. But the freedom um, to really to the freedom to explore what actually I cared about. I got to try a lot of different things, and I didn't succeed at all of them, to be clear. Like some things, work out better than others, um but I think even this is one of the things that I believe is most important for every young person to have access to, actually, is just the opportunity to try things and to figure out what really not just lights me up, but where do I feel in flow? Where do I feel like my best? Where do I feel like I can um, give of myself in a way that not just makes me feel good, but makes, you know, the people around me feel like, something's good's happening, and they're getting value out of whatever it is that we're doing. So I think it was just, I think confidence came from seeing myself actually take some risks at that point, when I was in my teenage years, and finding that some of them paid off, but none of them resulted in um, like, even when something didn't turn out to be my thing, didn't turn out to be the thing that I wanted to pursue, like nothing terrible happened to me, like when something bad, even when something didn't work out, like I found that I could pick myself up and try again or try something different. And having, I think, a safe space to do that um, was everything, actually. And it was where I kind of emerged saying, even if I'm not sure necessarily exactly what I want to do or exactly what I'm good at in every step of the way, but I have the confidence, I think, to try. And that, I think, is a huge gift.
Where did the spaciousness to try come from? Because I think the prevailing story in the American sort of memory is that, children of immigrants don't necessarily get to do that, that there's a tried and true path. There are a couple of key things you're allowed to do, and you're supposed to choose the things that are most obviously and most likely going to pay off in terms of stability, right?
Mm,
Medicine, doctor, be a doctor, a lawyer, a engineer, study the
yep.
sciences, but no art, no drama, none of that. And so it seems like you had an experience that I just don't think we hear enough about, right? That it doesn't seem like it was as rigid and sort of formulaic, that there was some spaciousness. And if that's accurate, like where did that come from?
Yeah. I think there is accuracy to that, for sure. And to be self-aware, I thought I wanted to be a doctor I thought I wanted to be a doctor until I was in college and sort of got exposed to some other pathways. I was not pressured, for sure, to take that path. But to your point, my parents are first generation immigrants, but so am I. I was not, I wasn't born here. I came here when I was young, but I wasn't born here. And so I probably felt some of that pressure. I actually less from them as people, because they were extremely supportive. I mean, they were definitely, I think my parents definitely, wanted us to apply ourselves in every way possible, and hoped that we would go to the best schools we could, and make the best possible life for ourselves. But I never felt this sometimes, toxic seeming pressure that others have described. And I'm very, very lucky for that. Um, but I probably put some of it on myself, to be clear. So I did try a lot of different things, um, and a lot of that was in science, and a lot of it was geared toward a future in which I was sure that I wanted to go into medicine. And I think I know, and it wasn't just because that's what people do. To be clear, I definitely, it came from like interest. It came from like a love, actually, of science. It came from a desire to make change and make a difference and help people. And that was one of the clearest ways I thought as I was growing up that one could do that. So, I think it came from a relatively balanced place, but still, I was, I actually grew up. I remember saying to an interviewer once like applying for college, like, I'm all left brain. There's no right brain, which now I think is such a silly, it's such a silly analysis. It's not really how anything works. And I definitely don't think of myself like that now, but I definitely, saw myself, even as I tried other things, as, a very like scientifically oriented future doctor, which again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with. That's a beautiful direction to go. And it isn't what I ended up doing, but yeah, to respond to your question, it, even if it didn't come from my parents who were always, as we were growing up, very like, very encouraging of us to try as many things as we could and wanted to. Um, I did put that on myself too.
Yeah. So then how does a future doctor of America go on to go on to start a really powerful nonprofit for young people, right? The Future Project. So talk to us about the shift, or what sort of prompted you to say, maybe that's not the path that I'm going to go down. There's actually something else that's lighting me up.
I I definitely could never have predicted when I was younger that this is what I would be doing. And I don't even think that it was fully clear that I was going to be doing this until we were doing it, actually. But it all started, if I had to sort of trace it back to something, I think it started with, and this doesn't necessarily sound obvious, but if you give me a second, I'll connect the dots. But it started with the college newspaper, I think. So, I'd done a little bit of that in high school, but again, it was a small school, and so it wasn't like a huge part of my life, even though it was something I put time into in high school. When I got to college, freshman year, I showed up. The college newspaper where I went to school was a pretty big deal. And a lot of people kind of dabble in it, freshman year and then never do it again and, write a few stories here and there. So I remember my freshman year, I went to the building. It was a, beautiful old building on campus, and walked in, and it was just like, I remember like feeling almost, like that moment of just awe walking into the building because there were probably, I don't know, 50 or to 100, it's probably like 7 p.m. after dinner, and there's probably 50 to 100 students in there, um, and like all these editors who were, just 2 years older than me, but at that point felt much older, just running this daily college newspaper that, was put out, on campus, but also in the community, and people would read and really get their news from, and just being amazed that it was all young people leading it was kind of a business, and it was kind of and it was a, journalistic endeavor. It was a newspaper, and it was a culture and a community, and it was just incredible to me that, you know, people my age and not that much older than me were in charge of it all, and we're making it all happen. And we'd go to the dining hall the next morning and like sit down and take out the newspaper and look at it, and it was made by all these people, devoting their time, and energy and brilliance and creativity to making that happen. And so I went and I asked for a story, and it was a small story, obviously it was my first one, and I came in and edited the next night, and it was with the editors, and my story was like bad. I like forgot. I like didn't have any quotes. It was just like such a silly thing when I look back on it, but I loved it. And so I went and I wrote another one and another one. And by the next year, I was what they called a beat reporter. So I was writing 2 or 3 stories a night. And then by the next year, I was an editor, I was managing editor. And so I was there every single night, from like 6 p.m. to sometimes 6 a.m., usually 2 or 3 a.m., putting out the newspaper and seeing people read it the next day. And so I was captivated, by the fact that all these young people were leading it. I was really excited by the fact that it would give me an opportunity to learn so much, not just about the school, because like, okay, fine, but about the community actually, and how the school and the community interacted, and things that were happening in the surrounding area. Um, that was kind of the start of it. It was kind of, I think it first of all, opened me up to other ways of making change actually, like, wow, you can go. It sounds silly because it's obvious in many ways, but it was a visceral, I think, understanding that I maybe didn't have before, like seeing, a 19-year-old reporter go out into, the city and really try to understand what was going on with the political race, or the impact of a university decision on uh like people living in a specific ward. Like it was so exciting um to see the way that journalism and young people, could bring light to issues that were happening right around us. So that was exciting to me. And again, just seeing, I've always, even in my small high school and all that, was always excited by opportunities to lead and work with teams. But that was, this felt like a whole different level of that. And there was a budget to manage, and people to recruit, and culture, and everybody was always tired, and it was also college, so everybody was also drinking all the time. So it was like it was an interesting challenge actually, to figure out how to create quality news, while managing and cultivating people and teammates that were like the same age as me. So that, I think, really opened me up, and I did other things in college, but especially by the time I was an editor, like this was the main thing. um and along the way, the other thing that happened was that I spent, my mom is an educator. She's a very gifted teacher, taught in public schools, and then opened an after school learning center. And so I've always been, and I worked there a lot when I was in high school, so I've always been interested in, like, in schools and kids and stuff. So I spent, I did my own volunteering, as many people do, but being able to sort of see schools and the community, and some of the things that the school district was struggling with through the lens of journalism and the newspaper was just very eye-opening to me. And so I ended up actually changing my major. I was going to major in, I was thinking biology and international studies, I think was where I ended up changing my major to anthropology, because I kind of discovered that was like the closest discipline to journalism in many ways. You spend time with people, they're the experts on their lives, you try to understand and read back and synthesize and connect dots, but it's really about listening fundamentally. And it was exciting to me to like study and understand communities, um in a way, that in a deliberate way, actually, that I didn't really fully realize was possible. So anyway, there's still, obviously some steps between that and actually starting the organization, but this was kind of what, started to spark me and help me realize that there were a lot of worthy pursuits that one could take on, inclusive of, but not limited to, medicine, that could create, you know, support change, for people who wanted it. And yeah, and that was really exciting to me.
What is it about the idea that young people have the capacity to have that sort of impact that was so striking for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's still striking. I still feel honestly like we all we're as a not so young person now, like obviously we all have the power to make change and to create, the future that we want to see and all that. But there's a I don't know, there's an energy almost a purity of intention and of purpose that can exist when you're a young person. Uh, Not saying it has to stop when you emerge into adulthood more, but it's certainly easier to access as a young person. And I think that energy felt I don't know, it just felt very natural to me to I just wanted to be part of that. I wanted to um and this was, just to put it in context, this was also, I was in college, I graduated in 2009. So this was right around the time of, Obama was coming onto the national stage and then running for president. And I think us, we were it was a very sort of millennial desire for, it was earnest. I think there was a lot of earnestness in this. Like, there's this opportunity for us to be part of things that are bigger than ourselves, to have power to make change. And I think when you might know that, but then when you feel it, when you experience it, when you realize you can do that too, I feel like that's a feeling that I hope everyone can have. It's a lot of the reason I do what I do, is that people can find those moments of, wow, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now, um and I feel both lucky that I got to have that opportunity, but what a gift, to be able to try to support young people, in finding that for themselves too.
So what leads you to start the Future Project?
Okay, so after I graduated, my first real job, I had a job for a few months before that, but my first real job was as a speechwriter in DC. And my partner Andrew, who by the way I met at the newspaper, he was editor in chief, I was managing editor. We had been reporters together. We had found that we really liked working together, and we had a great sort of creative um, uh, connection, and yeah, and it felt very additive when we would work together, like, just exciting to bring our perspectives together and see what came of it. So we actually both ended up, not really intentionally, actually, moving to DC to be speechwriters. And I was writing, I still had the medicine public health context in my mind, and I was writing for an extraordinary person and leader named Peggy Hamburg, who was at the time leading the FDA, which, I didn't really have any knowledge of the FDA, honestly, besides what we all, I think, know. So I was going to work for her. It wasn't, that honestly, at first, at least, not that much interest in the FDA specifically. She'd had already a very long career in public health. She was the head of the New York City Health Department, and then served under Clinton at HHS. And so she'd been a policymaker, a doctor, a leader in multiple contexts. And was also, her mom was the first Black woman to graduate from Yale Medical School. She also had a really interesting family history, I thought, that that added to her perspective and strength as a leader. And so I went to work for her, and it was amazing. Like, I learned a lot. I was able to take the writing skills that I was developing as a reporter and as an editor and apply them in a way that was both was different, but also, exciting. And it gives you, I think, a role of speechwriter, especially when you're so young, is a really interesting and cool way to serve in the government, actually, because you get this, like, you get to work with the principals, you get to work, you're like, right, you're not at the top, you're not like making any policy or anything, but you get to see, everything that's happening. And the FDA, again, I underestimated, I think, how interesting of a place it was. It's like, as I know, because I wrote many speeches, it regulates 20 cents on every dollar that we spend as Americans. And so there's a ton within the portfolio. So I learned a lot. And, I knew, Peggy knew, like, that wasn't, my ultimate goal. And I still thought at that point, maybe I'll go back, do a post-bac, finish my last couple of pre-med classes, and then apply to med school. And I think, honestly, I and Andrew, we got caught up a little bit, in a hopefully positive way, in the energy of the Obama era, DC, Washington spirit. Less DC, meaning it wasn't like, oh, we want to stay in DC, but that idea that we could create something, that we could make change, that we could see, what was and wasn't working in society, and lean in and listen. And I think, both of us, as I mentioned, my draw to young people, to schools, to education, came a lot from my mom, and her background as an educator. And so I'd always been spending, time in schools, time with young people. And so had Andrew in his own way. And this was the era where a lot of the discourse in like ed reform was about the problems with teachers. It was just what people were talking about. Like, we need more teacher training. Like, we need to get rid of the bad teachers. Like, that was a lot of the conversation. And I think what we noticed was that it was just not the conversation that was happening in schools, that students for the most part loved their teachers, that teachers were, most of them, that every teacher I've ever met, like, was in their classroom because they love and believe in young people and love education and, want to give of themselves. And so what we were seeing, I think, was we were just seeing, I think, a different problem, actually, which was that students and their teachers weren't always like, they were like, why are we here exactly? Like, what are we, what does this have to do with my life? And not every single thing, obviously, that was happening in school. And like I said, this isn't about individuals. It was really about a system that maybe was designed for a purpose that wasn't fully relevant anymore. And so a lot of what was happening, in life, in your community, in your family, in your home, as you think about your future, was not necessarily what you were talking about, every day in school. And there's a lot of stress and anxiety that comes from that too. So, Andrew and I had been having those conversations with each other, but also with, others, with friends, with folks we were working with people we knew from school, etc., with young people. And so it was like, this sort of coming together of both, a specific issue and set of ideas with, honestly, this energy, this, like, maybe we can do something about it energy that was definitely inspired by the moment in time, but also by, and like a generational, I think there was a bit of a generational feeling there too. Like, we can all make a change. We can make a difference. We can give what we're good at. We can seek passion and purpose and contribution. And so, there wasn't like a moment. It was a little bit more organic than that. And before we knew it, we had this whole team of volunteers, the really diverse set of people from many backgrounds and like academic experiences and life experiences, coming together and starting to imagine what it could look like to make it possible for young people who, by the way, were like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years younger than us. So for us as young people to try to help make it possible for other young people, for younger young people, to have the opportunity to discover what moves them, what excites them, what they're good at, and to translate that into purpose of some kind, to make change, to make their life, to make their world a little bit more what they want it to be. So it was, it was a little bit of being kind of, and I hope the best way, like, caught up in the moment, like in a bigger moment, as well as, some really specific grounding, and grounded, observations and ideas about what was possible and what was missing, in the lives of young people every day.
So tell our audience what the Future Project is, because I think that a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot, but some people who are listening are probably like, okay,
Yeah.
passion, purpose, like, all right, Kanya, like, why does
Yes.
that's not the real world, right?
Yep.
Like, that's not real life. So help us understand, what is the Future Project and why does it matter?
Yes. Well, I will say that I actually hope that fewer people are saying that now than they might have 10, 15 years ago, because, we're seeing this um, massive and growing, unfortunately, mental health crisis, as the Surgeon General's office called it, the youth mental health crisis that has really come to the forefront of people's consciousness over the last couple of years since COVID, in a way that, didn't exist before. And a lot of what the crisis existed before, but the consciousness, the awareness of it, I think, has increased very much so over the last couple of years. And so we're seeing that, and one of the big things that, folks much smarter than me have pointed out is often that that crisis, at the individual level, comes from not having that sense of purpose, not knowing, what you want from life. And I don't mean, you have one purpose and then you stick to it that's not real, but to be able to find purpose and meaning in life, to have the agency to set and pursue goals, dreams that really matter to you, and that you want to see happen, at a big scale, but also at a small scale every day in your life, is a big source of creates a lot of anxiety. Like, when you talk to young people, talk to them about what they're really anxious about. A lot of it is about the future. A lot of it is about what's going to happen next, both because, the world can be a scary place, but also because it's hard to find your place in that world when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. So there's, I think, a lot of context that we're more aware of as a society now, that sort of provides a backdrop for what the Future Project is and was. But more specifically to your point, what we built, what we sort of as I said, we wanted young people to have opportunities to discover and pursue the things that really matter to them. We use the language of dreams a lot because it's very inspiring and I think important. But at the end of the day, it's really about, like, do I know what I actually want? What is the goal that really matters to me? And do I have the skills and the mindsets that I need to pursue that goal? And there's a lot of really tangible, to your question, like really tangible, really relevant skills, skills around of communication, skills of, relationship skills, leadership skills, and a lot of really important beliefs and mindsets. Do I have agency? Do I have the capability to learn something new? That we're, I think, learning more and more are often the difference makers when you're in the workplace, when you're leading a family, when you're trying to have a relationship with a friend. That we don't really learn growing up. And the Future Project is not the only organization, to be clear, that, like, has this thesis sort of as the backdrop, but it was really that's what we were trying to create, was opportunities, to build those mindsets and build those skills in really tangible ways. And so specifically, we built out a program through which young people would, do some self-exploration and then choose a project, design and launch a project of some kind. It could be big, small, it could be community-based, school-based, it could be about your life. There were students who would write books or poetry, students who were, like, starting clubs in their schools, students who were, leading change campaigns in their neighborhoods or in their communities. And it wasn't really about the projects. I think it was one student actually said, "Oh, I get it. Like, the projects are kind of Trojan horses," and that's true. I mean, the projects are amazing, like amazing things that they were creating, but it wasn't really about, like, is this project. We weren't like an entrepreneurship organization, for example, which are great, but that's just not what the purpose wasn't. Build a successful project. Although, of course, we gave them support to do that. It was learn about yourself and build skills and recognize that you have power, you have agency, to create the life, the world that you want to see, and that will benefit the people around you. So, that was sort of the purpose. I mean, it still is. There's still, I know, there's a lot of, I think, worthy arguments that can be had and debates that can be had. You look at, like, Maslow's hierarchy, for example, and a lot of people interpret that as, well, you have to have safety and security before you can, pursue purpose and passion, some of these other things. And I think there's some validity to that, for sure. There's some very basic needs that it's very difficult to live your life without. And so I think it's important to not be dismissive of that. Absolutely. And I do think that, having that agency, that sense of purpose, can often help you, and help you in the context of your community to, to continue to develop your own sense of safety, your, find access to your basic needs. So I feel like it's not really a linear process, that all of these, there's a much more sort of cyclical experience that, that plays out for people.
Yeah.
in their-
And talk to us about building this, right? And I don't wanna dismiss the fact that you kind of said, so we managed to build a community of volunteers, to you built a company.
Yeah.
You built a formal, you built a company, right? And you, um, were leading it with Andrew, with your life partner, right? So talk to us about some of the early lessons that you learned around company building.
Yeah. There's so many. and you, spoiler alert, as you know, like we had a very big failure a handful of years ago, which honestly, and I think for a while purely negative, but now I think in a more nuanced way definitely colors a lot of those early lessons. There was magic, in those early days, and throughout the experience still there's so much magic, but there were, it was a bunch of young people with like boundless energy, and spirit and desire and passion, just like trying to bring something to life. And so you're right, we did build a company and raised a lot of money and grew a huge team over time. I mean, huge in context, but it didn't, at first I think it didn't really, to your point, it was a little bit like the transition from we're a ragtag group of volunteers to we're a company was a little softer than that. It was a little bit less obvious almost that was what was happening. And I think there's a lot of good to that. Of course, it was coming from, like, I think all of our intentions were so aligned, and it were pure. There was a real desire to build something that would benefit young people and society. And I think when we look back, there were a lot of fundamentals that we just didn't know about, and you almost can't learn fast enough, that if we were to go back and do it again, we would do it with a lot more intention. So I mean, I think one of the big things, from a strategy perspective was, as a nonprofit, it is easy to think that, or it's easy to, for some period of time, I think less so now because people are getting much more, if you just every day, everyone's getting smarter and smarter about this, I think, but it's easy to, like almost get away with not really building a sustainable business model, especially if you're having some success and surprising success, because we've never done before, fundraising. You kind of think like, oh, great. Okay. We're raising money and we can just keep pushing ourselves and keep raising more. But the reality is that is, that you can't and shouldn't grow something if you're not sure how that, that one program unit, for example, is going to be able to, last year over year over year without the extreme hustle that sort of philanthropic fundraising requires after some period of time. And it's not to say philanthropy can't be a business model, but that has to even be a little bit more intentional than I think we realized. So there's a lot of lessons, and I can, talk about any more of those as is interesting. I think on the culture side, one of the big things that, again, there was I think we're really powerful as a team about setting a strong culture. Like there was a really big and really clear shared sense of purpose. We really liked each other. People wanted to spend time together. We had a lot of fun. We worked really hard, very millennial of us, very hard. But I don't think we always knew, this is, again, it's a little bit like, people talk about like strategy and culture, the kind of two arms. And I don't know that we were always very effective at balancing, those two pieces of the puzzle. So for example, it took us a while and again, we probably still made errors about this even as we were getting smarter about it. But like, we often hired some people because we were like, this person's amazing and they feel so aligned. And yes, we'll figure out what they'll do eventually. And, that's okay in the beginning, because at the first beginning, we were all just doing anything, to bring the idea to life and find the partner schools and, design the program and test it with the students and do fundraising and all that. But eventually, you have to get more buttoned up. And it's not that we weren't buttoned up. It's that we were still, we were learning as we went. And so often if we're like, oh, okay, this role isn't really needed, or, it needs to evolve, we would try to change it in real time, as opposed to say, okay, this role is not needed. That sucks because we love this person, but it's not going to work anymore. We were just, I think there was an immaturity to the way that after we grew to a certain point, that we continued to grow and evolve the organization. And it's hard to get out of some of those patterns after a period of time. And again, they're well-intentioned. That's not the point, but it resulted, I think, in, some like roles that weren't probably mission critical after a certain point. It resulted in, as I was alluding to earlier, just a very stressful, like fundraising focused existence for me and Andrew in particular, and a handful of other people on our team. So it was, I think there was, the sort of energy and direction. There was a lot of great stuff. There's a lot of things that even now I keep wanting to pull into, all the iterations of what we are and what we'll become. And I think we didn't set ourselves up actually to grow sustainably. I think that is, if you have to summarize it, and some of it was lack of knowledge, but that's only an excuse for so long, because you have to just keep learning. And there are some things that, knowing intellectually and actualizing, making some of the tough decisions required to actualize some of those lessons is challenging, and we didn't do all of that effectively over time.
So bring us. Let's peel back a little bit, because for folks who don't really know like what size you're talking about, I think it's really important to contextualize that. So in the beginning, at your height, how much money were you all raising? How big was the team at its biggest? Sort of give us a sense of, the size and the scale at its height.
Sure. So I would say we were at our biggest in like 2018, 2019. So it was before the pandemic. We had about, it's like 115 to 120 people on staff full time. In addition to, we had interns and contractors and all kinds of other folks who were working in our schools and with our team, sort of our national headquarters team. And, we were, I think at the biggest, we were like $15 million a year, which, is tiny in the scope of the world, but felt very large, especially given the year over year growth. And like I said, the fact that, although schools were paying us, we had other sources of income, but it was never, schools couldn't pay the full cost of the program. That, we had the program was built around this amazing role that we created called the Dream Director. And the way the model worked is we would recruit, train, embed Dream Directors in schools, high schools, public high schools across the country. But the Dream Directors were on our payroll. So there was a lot of people. And it also meant that the cost per school was $125, maybe even $150,000 if you included all the training, all of these sort of overhead and support costs. And, in some corporate environments, that's nothing. But in the nonprofit world, a public high school can't really afford that entire cost. So they would pay us what they could. But the reality is, and even often local foundations, can maybe pay it, but can't necessarily pay it forever. And the way our model worked was that the Dream Director was and is they provide a service. It's not a come in, change the school in 2 years and leave. That's not the idea. The idea is have a person in the building all the time who is there to support and coach the students and partner with the whole school to create a more positive school culture. And so what was happening was that, the national funders that we were fortunate to recruit and to get funding from were essentially subsidizing, not in a wrong way, but in a unsustainable way, the programmatic delivery and growth. And that's just, like I said, I keep using the word sustainable because that feels the most appropriate here. It's not sustainable, we can't keep creating new things to get funders excited so that we can, keep running the programs. Like that's not sustainable either. So we kind of, we eventually hit a wall, but yeah, we had grown, we grew, and it was really between like 2014 and 2018, we went from like $4 million to 15. It was, and again, for a nonprofit, that's a pretty quick year over year growth.
It absolutely is. And so talk about how you built your team, your leadership team. Like, how did you do that? Who taught you how to do that? Who said, Kanya, Andrew, here's how you think about your structure. Here's how you think about building your team. Here's how you think about who you need. What sort of informed and guided you in those early years?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are very fortunate to have like a lot of great advisors who helped us think about a lot of those questions. And, we would try to do our own reading and learning and sign up for things and, try to expose ourselves as much as possible to, um, to both like best practices and conventional wisdom, but also like the newest ideas that people were, especially, I mean, we know in the mid 2010s, it was like, what's happening in Silicon Valley? Like, and can we adapt that? What's that? I think a lot of nonprofits were trying to figure out, like, how do we bring the most cutting edge ideas into our work? Sometimes in productive ways, and sometimes honestly in ways that, in hindsight, I'm like, why did we try to do that? But so we had a lot of people advising us. And we have, a couple of team members in particular who had been with us from the beginning, who were like, we were all together really in the trenches trying to figure things out. Um, but I think one of the things that was difficult, and it is difficult for a young leader, is, you have to find the balance between listening to what someone thinks you should do and figuring out what you think you should do. And I think there were times when we were like too far on one end or the other of the spectrum. Like, we really earnestly and honestly did really try to listen to every piece of advice that we were given. And there were times when we would almost be like, okay, that was all great, but here's what will work for us. And that was probably, and we were maybe trying to, like, we were trying to reinvent wheels that didn't need to be reinvented. And then there were times when we would do like, okay, this person really knows what they're talking about. Like, let's do that thing. And then we're like, oh, well, that's missing our spark, or it doesn't really feel like us, or, it doesn't need to happen that way for an organization our size, that, that we don't need that much bureaucracy. So I think it's always this dance, of trying to figure out, what works for others, what do others think you need to do, and what will work for your unique case. And, there were times we really got it right, and there were times we really didn't. And, and that's a challenging thing. I think, in general, one thing that if we could go back and like give ourselves some advice, like, people often talk about like the flying the plane and while building it, or building the
Right.
plane while flying it. Metaphor, it's like so overused. And I remember at one point someone was like, I don't know why people wouldn't just like land the plane and like just get off of it for a second and like fix it and then take off again. And it seems so silly. And it's hard once you get past a certain size. And especially when you always feel like you're behind on the fundraising, journey, to do that. But I feel like if we could go back, which, like, whatever, hindsight, but still, if you could go back, because it's a useful exercise, even if it's not something that one can do. I think there were a couple of moments where like we should have just like landed the plane, gotten off for a second, and said, okay, what needs to be done here? Like, let's slow down a little and get control. And I don't mean control like in a command and control way. I mean, get control of what we want and what we need, and be a little bit more systematic and deliberate about our next steps. Again, easier said than done, um, but I think like that feeling of building the plane while flying it is exciting until you get to a certain size, and then it's like it's not exciting. It's like it's stressful, and it's hard to know if you're making good decisions because there's so much going on. And so that's something that I, as I've grown up, and also, trying to learn from the past, learn from the mistakes and the lessons, really try to do more of now, is like build my own personal slow down reflection, processes, but also give ourselves as a team the space to do that. And not just like performatively for ourselves, but actually what's happening right now. Are we doing what we want to be doing in the way we want to be doing it? And if not, what do we need to evolve, and how do we actually create a path to do that? As opposed to just say, oh, we need to change X, Y, and Z, but we can't because we just got to get back to the grind tomorrow, in order to set ourselves up for success. So,
Kanya, what did you do with that pressure, right? What did you do with the pressure to raise the funds, right? The pressure to be able to lead the company because
yeah,
people are counting on you, right? The pressure to deliver for young people, something that you so obviously cared about then and clearly care about now. And you mentioned earlier, some of the feelings around, and I don't know if you still have them at this time, doing all of that, and I still want to be liked, right? What
yeah.
did you what did you what did you do with all of that?
Yeah, I wish my answer was like I had these like great self-care practices and that I was like very diligent about like working with a coach, which is, I am a big proponent of coaching, and yet, like I think honestly I internalized a lot of it. This is authentically a very optimistic person, and I like to operate with a lot of like joy, and like I try to show up with joy and with love and with enthusiasm. And so sometimes I think I even didn't realize how much I was internalizing the stress, um and there were times that like at one point I was like, okay, the only way I'm going to work out is if I like get a trainer. So like, there are things we tried over time to try to, you know, um take care of ourselves, but I think the reality is, and I imagine that this is something that a lot of other founders and leaders face. And I hate to say it because it's like so gender normative and stuff, but I wonder if it's also more true with like women and women identifying people. I internalized a lot of stress, and I developed a little bit of like sacrificial martyry, you know, tendencies. That sounds very dramatic, but I just, I think I came to internalize that like I just had to that I had to choose the work, the team, the mission over myself. And it's a false dichotomy, to be clear. It's like, but I just think that, and I'm really mission oriented, so I don't actually think it's a bad thing to throw yourself into a mission, but I think that that the like the that internalization that like actually what I want doesn't really matter as much as all this other stuff. I wasn't like at a place where I'm like, I don't matter, or that like nothing I think or care about matters. I wasn't in that kind of place, but there was this sometimes subtle, sometimes less subtle belief that I had that was the best thing I can do for the team, for the work, is to put myself, to deprioritize myself on multiple levels. Like literally that meant sometimes taking care of myself, like making sure I got enough sleep, making sure I was working out, making sure that I had like friends and a social life outside of work. And like, I sacrificed a lot of those things. Nobody was asking me to, but I had sort of decided that that was what was necessary. Um and uh and so it wasn't the healthiest relationship with stress. And but most of the time I was still pretty happy. Like I wasn't, that's why I want to make clear that I wasn't like sitting around acting like depressed or moping or anything like that. That was probably what was kind of confusing, because at times I would be like, wow, like, whew, am I like, how long can I do this? I wonder, like, am I, but then I would wake up and feel great, and be excited that I got to, there's so much positive stuff, right? I got to invent my own job. I was working every day with people and the person that I loved. I was, getting to serve and spend time with like amazing, fun young people. I was getting to like start things in new cities and learn about those communities. Like there's a lot of amazing stuff that I was so deeply grateful for. And there were also just like cool experiences. I always laugh because like I feel like not the nonprofit world is funny because it's like, you're like feeding yourself Chipotle because you at first aren't paying yourself anything and also don't have any time to eat, but then you're like going to a gala and like meeting a fancy person. It's just like a funny juxtaposition of experiences. So there's so much to be grateful for. So I wasn't sitting around feeling sorry for myself. And I think I had internalized the stress into and the pressure into a set of not very productive beliefs, about what I had to sacrifice in order for the work to succeed. And again, nobody asked me to make those sacrifices or believe those things. This is like, it was how I was dealing with it. And yeah. And to the point about being liked, like I think also, that's that's a big, just personally, I'm not speaking for everyone who was on our leadership team, but just personally, it was a big reason why it was so difficult, I think, for me sometimes to figure out, like, in your intellectually, it's very clear that as much as you love the team has come together to serve a mission. And the ultimate aim is to make sure that those young people, in our case, the young people, are getting what they need, and that we're delivering with like as excellent of quality as we can. And we're doing right by them. And like, and every dollar that we possibly can spend on them is going toward that. Intellectually, that there was never a doubt about any of that in my mind. Often though, in practice, especially because, as the organization grew, my work and my time was focused more and more on, like, I would still go to schools and try to spend time with young people, but the day to day, I was thinking about the organization, the company, as you call, like thinking about the organization, I was thinking about the fundraising, I was thinking about the team, I was thinking about our policies, I was thinking about like who was disgruntled about what and who was inspired about what and what role needed to be filled. And even though in my dream world, I would be focusing, I liked some of that work a lot, but I would be focusing a lot more, on, is our program working, and how do we, is there a policy agenda that we are interested in? How do we really, like a lot of those, like both programmatic and strategic questions. Ultimately, I think what happened is I almost conflated impact with serving our team members. And I'm being careful about saying that, because I do actually believe that creating a healthy and thriving work environment is will always be part of the job of anyone leading a team or a company. So it's not to say that's not important, but I think I conflated it sometimes. And so, so I would almost be like, okay, we believe in people, we believe in, people have to find their passion and their purpose. Like, well, maybe this team member just needs to be like, maybe we need to change the role. Maybe we need to give them another chance. Maybe we didn't support them well enough. And some of that stuff might've been true, by the way. They may not have been fully set up for success. And, moving someone around to 4 different roles, this usually means that, that they should be lovingly and in a positive way, set free to pursue their next opportunity. And that was really difficult for me. And it still would be. I mean, I'm not saying that it's like easy for anyone to like let someone go or eliminate a role, but I think that I sometimes, just be very self-aware and self-critical. Like I sometimes miss the forest, I think, for the trees, because I was, um, there were times where I was like, we've got a few dream directors working in a city. The work is great, but we have no way to fund this after this year. Like something probably should have had to change. I'm not saying that immediately means like shut down a city, but you have to, you know, like willful persistence is not really a strategy. It's a tactic to employ in fulfilling a strategy, but it's not a strategy. It's hope. It's not a tangible path forward. And I think I let myself get into those situations too often. And, that's part of what contributed, I think, to the like, oh boy, we've grown this, but it's not really growing sustainably. And like, how do we move to the next, how do we take this forward without having to make some really hard choices, and in hindsight, of course, I look back on it and I felt a lot of shame for a while about it, because I'm like, oh, I was lacking courage. I was like, and sure, those things could be true. And also I think, I was missing some skills, and I was missing perspective that, that are really important for leaders to have. And it's not the fun
Mhm.
part of the job, but it's important.
Yeah.
From your own experiences, but also from talking to so many leaders over time, that, you have to be able to make those really hard calls, in addition to building and growing and developing people and all that.
And also, you don't know a thing until you know it,
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
And that's also the hardest thing, is that so much of this you were doing for the first time, right? And, so that's one of the things, as I've been listening to you, is this story of there have been all these moments of, persistence, right, of energy, and it producing incredible results. And it did. It's what got the Future Project off the ground.
Yeah.
Without it, it may never have been a thing, right? If there was not the energy, the belief that you could forge something out of nothing. And that's what makes founders spectacular, right? Because they can do that, right?
Yeah.
And some of the other things, they're important, but it doesn't always mean that founders are
Yeah.
best suited or quite frankly love
Yes.
doing those pieces. And it doesn't make that less important or doesn't make that individual bad, but it's your uncommon gift as I've been listening to you is this ability to understand a context and like people, right? To
Mhm.
create conditions for things to happen, to create something from nothing, right? To do that and to help other people believe that they can do it too, right? And that's a particular set of uncommon gifts. And then there are the pieces around company building, right?
Yeah.
Which are different, right? They're not the same. They're not necessarily the same.
Yeah.
And so I've been really struck by your reflections around the pieces that were just hard and acknowledging that those pieces they're hard for everyone the first time they have to go
Yeah.
through them. And then that's where the lessons come. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the pandemic, right? And sort of that moment, right? We talked about like the height of, where you all were, but then the pandemic came barreling down and a lot of organizations were forced to land the plane,
Mhm.
right? They were
Yes.
forced to
Yeah.
put the plane, like we have to think. And so how did that moment in time shape you? What was happening at the Future Project? If you could sort of take us back to Kanya then, bring us into her sort of state of mind at that time, help it contextualize that for the audience.
Sure. Oh, well, thank you too for your reflection back. That was very powerful. So I think in order to put the pandemic in context, I have to go to a year before the pandemic because, I alluded earlier to this huge, catastrophic, at least it felt at the time, failure moment for the Future Project, which happened in 2019 before the pandemic, which, basically you can kind of probably hear it looking backwards if you think about some of the comments I was making that we got to the point, um and it all unfortunately, we just it just it all felt like it happened very quickly, but it didn't, right? Over time we got to the point where we were very dependent on a handful of extremely large donors, one in particular, who had invested a lot of money in our work. And we ended up having a difference of opinion and of and of sort of vision around the future of the mission, with a very large funder. Um and we just he was like, okay, that's fine, but then I'm not putting in any more money. And we just ran out of money basically. And it was a you know, it was a shell shocking kind of experience because, first of all, you just, to your point earlier about like the persistent, I was saying the persistence and the sort of, when you're, somebody once said, like, if you're a founder, often, you see a big hill and someone else is like, oh, okay, let's find another way around it. And you're like, a founder, an entrepreneur, or just a leader is like, I'm going to run up that hill and I'm going to run as fast as I can. And, so we had hit roadblocks before, and even leading up to this moment where things kind of felt like they fell apart, we kept finding ways to navigate and creating opportunities that seem like they might sort of get us over the hump and help us, give us a moment to land the plane and sort of regroup. And it just sort of never fully happened. And so we got to a moment we were like, there's just not any more money that's about to come in. And we had a more than $1 million a month burn, and every payroll every 2 weeks was, more than $500,000. It was a lot of money that we were responsible for, and should have been, to be clear. This is what you sign up for when you are a founder or CEO, that, you are responsible for. And so it just, all of a sudden became clear that the only way to, actually fulfill on our commitments to our staff, to pay them for the work that they had done and were doing, and and not get ourselves into a place within weeks where people had done work and they weren't going to get paid for it or something like that, which we just couldn't even imagine a reality like that. That we had to very, very, what felt like at the time, very quickly and very abruptly, just do a ton of reduction of the organization. And I, and it's funny, if you were to have sat me down at some point and you're like, Kanya, what are you like in a crisis? I'd have been like, I'm awesome in a crisis. I would be clear and I would tell everybody what was going on. And I would, and I would be as transparent as I possibly could. And I would give them the bad news. And I was just terrible in that sense. Like, I mean, I've given myself I've had a lot of time to heal and work through this. So I don't say that with like this, with self-loathing, but I was like, I wasn't trying to be unclear, untransparent, or anything like that. I was trying to give the team and our board and everyone all of the information I could, but I felt like a deer in the headlights. I like couldn't think clearly. And so I think as I communicated, what friends and teammates told me later was like, it just felt like you weren't telling us something, even though that wasn't what was happening. I was, but I was like scared is what was happening. I was scared and I couldn't see the path forward. And I really, don't like that. I like to have a plan. I like to be able to tell people that plan. And I just couldn't see it. And I remember talking to someone, they were like, I just didn't understand. Why weren't you telling us the plan? I was like, I didn't understand why I wasn't telling you the plan. Like I didn't know what the plan was. I didn't know how to get us out of this situation. I didn't, so I think I was on the one hand, like just so overly apologetic and self-blaming. And on the other hand, not really clear about the path forward. It was a very probably odd combination of ways of showing up, because it was like, okay, we get that you feel bad, but like that, what? Okay. And then like, but what are we supposed to do? And what's going to happen? And can you tell us, so I just, and it's not just in hindsight, as it was happening, I was like, okay, I would do like town hall meetings. I was trying to be transparent. I wasn't trying to hide. I just was both coming off as unclear and probably less trustworthy than people were expecting me to come off as. And I was feeling unclear, so we went through, so we, and unfortunately, like it happened in rounds as opposed to, the best practice is always, even if you have to like really, really shrink, like just do it all at once. But, first I didn't really want to, because I was like, it was still the spring. And I was like, I would like at least the dream directors to finish out the year with their students. So, so we had like one round that was all national staff. And then we had to make cuts, with the dream directors. And then it was still, the team was still, and, just to give you a sense, it was like 100 and something people, as I was saying. And then by the summer, it was like 30, or so. And, which was just a huge, huge change, obviously, on so many fronts. And I tried to, call every principal personally and sort of explain what was going on. Everybody was very kind about it all, but it was, it was like a shell shocking kind of experience for us. And then, even with that 30, like that's still a lot of people. It's still a lot of money they need to raise. Plus, a few months of crisis means you amass debts very quickly to vendors and things like that. So we were, not in a good financial position going forward. And then by the end of the year, it was still, it's also not a good and easy fundraising strategy to go out and be like, please help us to dig out of a hole, and you can't, you have to be transparent. You can't tell a funder like, oh, everything's going great, because that's, they'll figure it out, but also that's just wrong. So, everyone wanted to help. A lot of funders stepped up, and, but there was only so far that could go, given the hole that we were in. So by the end of the year, we had to like shrink even further. And we were, this was more intentional at that point. It was less like somebody's twisting your arm and there's no other choice, but it was still so painful. We like basically went down to about 10 people, and walked into 2020 with that, so I can get to the pandemic now. But, I think in hindsight, sometimes I'm like, well, should I just gone from 110 to 10? But at that point, I couldn't even fathom doing that, and I was, I felt like, I don't think this is true in hindsight, but at the time that felt like giving up, even though in hindsight that could have been, like the kindest thing to do for the organization was to just shrink it right away down to bare bones and kind of land the plane fully and get started again. But at the time it felt like that was giving up. And if I look back, like I say one thing to give myself credit for, which very, very hard to give myself credit for anything at this point, but was that there was a lot of, there was resilience, that I and the team and even team members that were laid off or or offered to be laid off. Or, it was people were, it was tough, and people were mad, as I understood, and mad at me personally, and I understood that. And but also, like, even people who were mad, um and people who were trying to figure out what to do best, that was best for the students, and for the mission, and for, for to preserve the mission, even amidst everything that was happening. And so it was a rough experience for everyone. you know it happened in 2019 as opposed to 2020, so a lot of people found jobs pretty quickly and all of that. So that was one sort of blessing around timing. But it was difficult. And I'll get to the pandemic in a second, because actually I feel like from here, like, the story actually starts to get, it's not right away, but it starts to become a story of, like, possibility and opportunity again. But looking back on it all, it took some time, obviously, to even come to a place where I can talk about this and not feel just extreme shame, and just like, I was gonna say self-loathing, but it's also like disgust. Like, how could I let this happen? I felt for a long time like like, let something precious, a child, just die, is what it felt like. As horrible and crass as that sounds, it felt like, and I was CEO at the time, I was responsible, and so I was like, how could I let this happen? Why? There were a million things that I wished I had done differently. And um but I but and I would never, never look back on it, I'm like, oh, I'm glad it happened. And I think I'm at the point where I can be, at least personally, I can't speak for anyone else, just, like, grateful for the lessons and for the
Mm.
growth. Um, on a organizational, absolutely, from an organizational level, on a strategy level, on the, like, staffing, a lot of the things you were asking about before. I think my perspective now is much more nuanced and mature, and like, there's no better teacher than failure, obviously. And, like, I think on a personal level, a lot around, a lot of the, like, how do I balance, I want people to like me, and to have a good time here, and to feel close to each other, with, you know, doing the best for our mission. And, like, I think there's a lot of self understanding, from a person who I think is generally not, like, an unself aware person before this, but there's a whole just different level of self understanding and self awareness and self acceptance that a massive failure, you know, forces you to develop and reckon with. So
Right.
it was a, it was a, it was like one of the most momentous and formative, which is funny to say formative, maybe because I was in my early 30s, but I was still, I still felt like a young leader, and I was still, to your point, doing a lot of this stuff for the first time. And so, it feels like I hope that, like, for the rest of my life, as I look back and as I grow and as I hopefully keep having the opportunity to lead and build, um, I will be able to keep mining that horrible, like, experience for lessons, for wisdom. And I hope others, I know they didn't have as much agency in all this. I didn't feel like I had agency, but I did. But I hope that others too, who had to go through that and didn't have the kind of agency that I did, I hope they're also able to, months, years now, 5 years later, um you know have some lessons, something that they got out of it too, besides obviously the really, that's, sometimes I'm careful to use this word, but I mean, there was trauma, honestly, that people, I think, me, and but not just me, like, not just Andrew, like, I think that all of us together, we were, we loved what we were doing, we loved the organization, we loved the culture, there was so much purpose. Purpose is the mission, purpose is also what we were all feeling. And so part of the reason I think people were so, not just angry, but, like, hurt as it was all happening, was it was the flip side of something positive. So I hope that 5 years later people are able to look at the experience um with not just, hopefully, I hope they got value, which I'm sure they did, because we just had amazing people working, there. So I know that they got value, at least from that, from working with incredible people and getting to serve the mission. But I hope that the struggle, the challenge, the meltdown, also yielded some lessons, some value 5 years later.
Kanya, if you could go back and talk to yourself, right? If you were sitting on a couch with,
Yeah.
Kanya from 5 years ago, what would you tell her?
Oof. I'm going to answer the question, but I think part of the problem is that I'm not sure she would be able to listen. I think she would be trying to. I'm not saying she would be like, get away, don't talk to me. But I think I was just so, it would have been hard. It was hard to listen to anything at that point because I would felt so much shame and also was just felt so much, like that. It's like I just couldn't see like what I should do. And that was a horrible and terrifying feeling. But I think, when these kinds of things are happening, these kinds of things, but when people are going through failures, especially in the business and work context, it often feels like you're the only one that ever has gone through it, because I remember just like these moments, you feel sorry for yourself too as it's happening. You don't want to, but you can't help but, so I remember like I was walking around like near my apartment and like I was like, look at all these people just like having dinner and like loving life. Like, like you feel so like I'm the only one, which is obviously so not true. Like, even then, I know it wasn't true, but if you feel like no one else has ever made these bad of mistakes, like, no one else has screwed things up so terribly ever. Like, and no one else would have if they'd had the opportunity to like lead this, it was just, you feel all these things. So I think part of what I would try to tell myself is like, is not only is that not true, but you don't have to be alone. Like, I wasn't alone. Like I have, as I've said already, like just these extraordinary parents and sisters. Like I had a family. I knew I wasn't, and that was part of what probably what kept me from like spiraling beyond a certain point. Like I knew I had people that loved me and would love me no matter what. I also had my partner who was fortunately and unfortunately going through the exact same thing. Fortunate because we both knew what each other was going through and we were never going to underplay or undersell it. On the other hand, maybe it would have been nice if one of us was like in a great state and the other one was melting down. So that was, it was an interesting kind of scenario. But so I had people that loved me. I wasn't alone in that sense, but I was too scared, I think, and too ashamed to do what probably would have been helpful is reach out to people who were, peers. Like if I had reached out to you while I was going through it, I don't know what you would have said to me, but it would have been interesting. If I had reached out to like another nonprofit leader, again, not after, not once I was like, oh, here are my lessons, but while I was in the thick of it, not even to be like, what do you think I should do? But just like, I'm going through this. Have you ever gone through something that made you doubt? And like, what helped you? Like, I wonder what that might have opened up for me, is, um, because of course, like there are a million things I would want to tell her about like what to do in the moment, but I feel like that's like a time travel exercise. It's not as interesting. I think it's more about like what my question always is like, what might I say to myself to help me get into a different mindset, actually, like assuming I could have changed nothing about, which is not true, but assuming I could have changed nothing about the actual scenario, if I could have gotten myself into a mindset of just a little bit less shame and a little bit more openness, which again is tends to be how I operate. And so it felt even more shameful that that's how I was like, I'm in a crisis and I'm being at my worst. What's happening? And it was just that. So if I could have helped myself, if I could help myself just sort of see the bigger picture, like emerge from my own like crisis of or cocoon of shame and just be like, okay, this is bad. You're responsible and you're also responsible for whatever comes next. So like let's find a way to get a little bit of inspiration maybe or get some ideas that might help you see beyond like, wow, I suck and I don't know where to get any money. um I don't know what might have happened. Maybe it would have helped my communication. Maybe it would have helped me figure out like how to like end a chapter. People remember endings. That sometimes was that haunted me for a while. I was like, there was so much good, but like people remember the endings, and then the end of their end of their relationship with the future project was in this horrible moment, like that's what it's going to be colored by. And that just might be true. And that's really sad. But I've had to sort of come to peace with the fact that that is true for a lot of people. But maybe some perspective would have helped me figure out how to like just come to peace with like, okay, this journey in this form is going to end for a lot of people. How can we do that in a way that's, I don't know, not like great, but like better than what it was, like, so I think that's maybe what I would focus on if I were able to sit on, I mean, I'll just give her a little hug and just be like, it's going to be okay.
I was
um,
waiting for that part. I'm like, "You wouldn't give her a hug?" I mean, that doesn't sound like the Tanya I know.
and I'd like a hug or two.
Just give her a hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kinda as you're talking, I'm struck by the fact that in the work context, we don't seem to have language for the experience you went through.
Mm,
And it makes me wonder if that contributes to the feeling of isolation,
mm,
not physically as in like there are no people,
yes.
but the
Yes.
feeling that this is your burden.
Yeah.
This is all your responsibility and it's all your fault. And I wonder if having language around it would make a difference, because even in listening to you talk, as you talked about not having I couldn't see, it sort of reminded me of like Simone Biles, right? And the
Yeah.
Twisties, right?
Yeah.
And that the work twisties happen at we have the work twisties,
Mm,
and we don't have language for the periods in our work lives where we lose a sense of sort of position
wow. Yeah.
and purpose and space, and that's what you were describing is
Mm,
I didn't know where I was,
yeah.
and so I couldn't find my footing, right? There was nothing for me to you guys think I was trying to hide something, I couldn't even see, I couldn't stick my landing, there was nothing
Yeah.
to right? And so I wonder what you think about that. I wonder as you reflect if having language to describe it, to be able to identify it in ourselves, but for others to also be able to identify it in us, if that might help, right? Be able to get the perspective, that we need.
Wow, that was a really powerful read back. I had never thought of it that way, but of course, like, I'm thinking about Simone Biles a lot, as everyone is right now because it's the Olympics. Um, but it's such an interesting and potentially really, really brilliant analogy, because I think, and she was, there were a lot of people who were really dismissive of what she was trying to describe, but and so it was, she had to sort of deal with that too. But it was all happening inside. To your point, no one could see that she couldn't see, And it's not the only piece of this puzzle. Like, obviously, there was a lot. I don't want to be like, oh, everything was going great, and then I got the twisties. That's not what happened. Obviously, there was a lot leading up to the moment, a lot of strategy errors and culture errors that I sort of referenced already. But I think you're right that, like, as the like crisis was like coming down on us, that's a really, wow, I feel like that's a really compelling way to describe it. And absolutely, I think giving it language, whether it's the twisties or something like that, or whatever it is, I think giving it language um would be game changing, actually. I think one of the things that's difficult, um I'll just speak to the nonprofit world, but it might be true in other sectors also, is, and I think there is some change happening on this front. So I don't want to be overly, but just what I experienced, I think, a lot in the earlier, like the first 5-6 years of the Future Project in particular, was, we're all like, I hate to even say this way, but like competing for the same dollars. Not exactly, but there is that, most of the time when I was spending time with other nonprofit leaders, it was at like a funder convening, and I really enjoyed it because we were sharing interesting insights and learnings with each other, and there's like so many interesting, beautiful people who were building organizations, so that was always great. But we were never really getting into the stuff that like made us look bad. We were never like sitting there and being like, I think I'm growing too fast, or like I think I hired the wrong person and I don't really know what to do because I don't yeah, I'm scared of making that change, or I think there's going to be backlash, or I don't really know how to navigate, like the tension between like the tension in our team that's healthy but confusing sometimes between, you know, the way people show up in their social justice identities. Like that, that's a difficult thing that, and it would be like, and it's not, and I'm not blaming funders, to be clear. I'm just saying that funders often convened us, which was useful. But when you're being convened by a funder, you're not going to sit there and be like, oh, I think I might have just screwed everything up, or I'm not really sure how this is going to turn out, or I think everyone thinks we have a lot of money, but we don't actually, because we have a lot of burn too, so those are not things that you're going to say necessarily. Again, I think there is some change. I think funders are actually, in the last few years too, with the pandemic and all that, like there is a little bit more, I've been noticing, openness and like, the ability to, I say to funders much more often, well, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I think a lot more than I used to. It used to feel like we had to have answers. It used to feel even like our solution, like our program had to solve like every problem, which obviously that's not what, but it felt like we often had to make that case. Like, no, this can also do that. And this can also do, like, so I just think that environment, again, it's not the fault of the environment, but I think a lot of us develop a lot of, just like barrier walls, a little armor around how we present what's going on. And even I remember many times people were like, oh, share what's not working. And even then everyone's saying strategic things, like, because it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing so well in my growth journey that this thing is, starting to, or, like, oh, we have so much interest from schools, like, but we don't know how to build a sales pipeline. Like, okay, cool. These are all like, my biggest problem is that I work too hard.
I work too hard. Exactly. Classic.
Exactly. But yeah, I feel like, the thing that's also really interesting to me in the question you put forward is that, what we experienced in 2019 was a full-on meltdown crisis, situation. But there were other times before that where we were not in a crisis, but we were struggling with something. And I would experience smaller versions of the Twisties, where I was like, what does success look like right now? Or, or there'd be an opportunity that seemed like it would be good for us, but it would require us to like, there were things that sometimes just didn't feel so clear. And, that's a sign there's something there. It either means that like, you know, you could develop as a leader more clarity of purpose, or it could mean that the opportunity wasn't right for you, or it could mean that you were walking into danger and you weren't really seeing it. There were definitely times where a funder was like, can you do this in this time? And like, we should have said no, but we said yes, because we were like, oh, we need that money, and that's an opportunity and we'll figure it out. But you would get that feeling that like, oh, this isn't right, kind of feeling, and try to kind of, anyway, the point is, I think it's a really interesting challenge for us actually to name some of this stuff, so that we can talk about it with each other, so that, I don't know, HBS professors can like study it and write cases about it, and we can learn, like, what do you do when you can't see, or what do you do when your gut's telling you one thing, but you're also, like, I feel like that's really, yeah, that's really powerful. And I hope that, this is the first time in any sort of public way that I'm talking about this. I've talked a lot, of course, to team members and people on a more personal level, but I hope that, me sharing, but also all the sharing that you're getting folks to do through this podcast will help with that, because, it's still lonely and it's still a difficult thing to lead. It always will be. But there's no reason it has to feel, you shouldn't have to feel like you're the only one that's ever gone through it, because that's just not true,
But it's also not helpful,
it's not
right?
helpful.
I mean, it's not true, and it's not helpful, and so that's
Yeah.
that's why I'm hearing, more people sort of talk about a couple of things that are really critical, like one being like peers, and not peers that are necessarily brought by like your investors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But like peers who are, that's why they have these are different organizations like EO or Young Presidents, organization, because there is something about the experience share, right?
Yeah.
Even as we talked about what you might say to Kanya 5 years ago, it wasn't necessarily do this. It was,
Yeah.
let me tell you about some experiences, right?
Yeah.
And that helps you understand. It gives you some context to decide for yourself, but it also helps you understand that there are others who have been where you are or who are there right now, right? And those experiences can help you decide
Yeah.
what you should do. And then the second thing we're hearing a lot about is just perspective, right? Because that sort of, as you talked about, I could sort of picture you walking through, the streets of New York and sort of being like, look at everybody else just living their life, eating
Happy.
sandwiches, walking their dogs, like nothing is going on. My world's falling apart. But
Yeah.
they're just like, don't have a care in the world. But that perspective to say, you might be lost right now, and maybe part of this growth is like it's everything is as it should be.
Mm.
And you will find your way again, right?
Yeah.
Like, you will find your way back home. You will find your footing. You can't
Yeah.
see it now, but a year from now, I promise you, we're going to be laughing about this,
Yeah.
or at least having a different conversation about this thing. But if no one can give you that perspective, it is incredibly isolating,
Yeah.
right? And then the shame just, like, piles on top of, each other. And then the third thing is, like, this language piece. Being able to give this and to normalize that growth is not always up and over to the right, that there
Yes.
are going to be these dips, and it's natural and to be expected, right? And they do that with teachers. They tell you there's gonna be, like, this cliff where you're, like, super excited, and then it's like the valley of whatever they call it, right? Where you're just gonna hate it. It's gonna be terrible. You're gonna be like, "I'm a horrible teacher." But there's like but knowing that you will get through it and that everyone else is going to go through this journey too, can be a game changer,
Yes.
right? And I think what I'm hearing from your story is that, um, you didn't have that. Right? You didn't have that. You didn't have the peers, or know that you could, right? You didn't have the someone who could give you the perspective to say, "Kanya, I see this. I've been here, and it's going to be okay. This sucks, but I promise you it's going to be okay."
Yeah.
And then the language to say, "This is what it is. This is what it's called,"
Yeah.
right? And it does happen, right? And you're going to be able to heal and recover.
And to your point, about it not being useful, to lack this language and lack the perspective, is that this having that, yes, it would have been useful for me, but actually what's so compelling is that it would have been useful for everyone else
Yeah.
because I would have been, even if it was 10% or 20% better, I would have been able to show up more fully as a leader. And even if the outcome was the same, even if people lost their jobs, even if
Right.
what had to happen, like, I maybe would have been able to handle it in a way that would have felt more aligned with how I like to show up and how I want to show up in the world, and more aligned with how I think people expected, me, but also just the organization, the culture to feel, in a moment of crisis. And so yeah, that's just it's a very powerful read back. And like I said, I figured this was going to be a beautiful conversation, but also a therapeutic one. And that was a really, really, yeah, I really appreciate the way that you read all that back.
Yeah. So as you look forward, we know that in those moments, that's where the
Yeah.
learning happens, as painful as it is. And so talk to us about what you're up to now, what the iteration of the future, project looks like now. And also I want to know about, like, you, the iteration of Kanya,
Yeah.
right? What's shifted, for you.
So one thing that was, um, I don't know, it's not good or bad, but one thing that was true was that we walked into the pandemic a very, very small team. So, that was at the end of 2020. We were like 10 people. We were going into the new year. I felt like a just shell of myself. And then suddenly the whole world, a couple months later, plunged into this, talk about crisis, like this, just a situation that none of us obviously expected, but also could have imagined. And like, and again, talk about perspective. Like, it was a frightening and deadly and just like terrible time, obviously, for people all across the world. And so, we internally, like everyone else, we had a handful of dream directors that were still working in schools. And of those, 10 people, we tried to maintain a few relationships with schools so that we could, of course, always serve young people, but also, you know, package up some of the lessons and sort of figure out what was next for us. Um, and they say, like, the time old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. But so what happened was that our students, the young people who were in the small school, handful of schools we were in, but also honestly, young people who we had been working with over time, some alumni, just started coming to us, coming to me, coming to members of our team, coming to dream directors, just sort of sharing what was going on. They were feeling the things we were all feeling. They were feeling isolated and confused and disconnected and lacking routine and scared. And so we just very, very like responsively and organically just started offering them coaching, which is a big part of what dream directors did in schools. Dream directors were part of what was beautiful and also difficult to scale about the role was that they had many different roles. They were culture change agents, they were facilitators of big workshops, they like did events, but one of the core elements of their role was their role as a coach. And so we just leaned into that because we were like, we're not going to do events and stuff, there's no culture change happening right now. So we started doing these group coaching sessions on Zoom, kind of inspired honestly by like Peloton and other workout that, like everything was going online. We're like, okay, if you can spend an hour working on your biceps and your triceps, like maybe you can spend an hour working on your purpose and feeling in community with others. So we were doing these group coaching sessions. We were calling it Future Live. We were talking to young people on the phone. We were having text message conversations. We were just kind of doing whatever we could to be supportive at that time. And honestly, weren't really thinking much of it in terms of like the bigger picture, and through that, it was also interesting. I talked about getting off the plane and like fixing it or building new parts of it. During that time, everything was kind of slow. I was honestly compassion for myself, but also compassion for my team kind of led me and us to be like, you know what? It's okay if we're not working all the time. It's okay if we like, once it was okay to like go outside for a walk. And then once we were like clear a little bit on what was going on, like, I was like, if you need to like leave your desk and like go do something and then come back or, and so we were working, but we were like in a very different, we felt like very relaxed and like, we're very supportive of each other. And we would like Zoom every day and just like have a little bit of connection to each other and all that. And meanwhile, we were offering, we were just supporting the young people. And as we were doing that, we were like, okay, maybe we should kind of clarify what's the method here. There's something we're doing. And, so it was just, again, it wasn't with the intention of like, this should become the future. Cause we also all thought the pandemic was like, remember there was like 2 weeks and then 4 weeks. And so we weren't like, oh, this is going to be something that needs to turn into something. We assumed we would, eventually get back to real life and, have to figure out where to go from there. And as we all know, that's not the story that played out. And so, we just kept doing, we're still offering the coaching, all that. And then some months into that, we kind of stepped back and we're like, wait, haven't we had sparks of an idea like this before? As because we had been thinking about even before the crisis happened, we were like, how do we build a more scalable version of the Dream Director? And we had thought maybe like, maybe there's an app, maybe there's, so those ideas started coming back. We started like saying, oh, we're learning something interesting. We started talking to the young people that we were working with. And we're like, well, what if this is the moment? Like, what if we could build essentially like a coach in your pocket for young people, like a place for them to turn when they feel, lost and stuck and alone or just need someone to talk to. And that specifically is designed to help them set and pursue the goals that really matter to them, to figure out, like to do that self-discovery work, to figure out what drives them and excites them, to learn how to set a meaningful goal, to learn those, the skills that it takes to pursue those goals, whatever they are, whatever they look like. And so it was, again, it was all very organic. We didn't have like the money to do this effort. We were very much still like, we had money to keep surviving, but it was not that much. And, so it wasn't like, we weren't like, oh, wow, now we got all this cash. What do we do with it? Instead, we were saying, it feels like maybe we've been inadvertently doing some piloting almost of an idea we've had, we've flirted with over the years. And I think a lot of our assumptions, I'll just speak for myself, our work was so in person before the pandemic that I was a little skeptical that virtual coaching or whatever could be that useful or that transformative. And I think those assumptions really got upended by the pandemic. And also, the generation of young people, Gen Z and beyond, like they're so digitally native that they're so much more comfortable actually talking in many ways. There's no reason to compare. In person is great. There's no reason to try to debunk that. But there's a yes and I think that we realized was possible through a virtual context that was very compelling. So then we started doing some low-cost piloting, kind of trying to explore, can you build that meaningful coaching relationship in a text-based, digital context? And we were doing that, and we said, okay, we're onto something. We went to a few funders. We got some initial funding to just start designing and building. Then the like Gen AI revolution happened, and so we started asking ourselves, what's the role of AI in all of this? Like, people were like, should you just build an AI only coach? That would be really scalable. But ultimately, like, we all know the value that a strong developmental relationship has for a young person. It's one of the most impactful things you can do is put a trained, caring adult in front of a young person. So we're like, no, there's a role for this for forever, we believe, for human coaches, but AI can make the whole system more efficient, more effective, more personalized, more cost effective over time. So what we've been building essentially for the last year, we're calling it Future Coach, and we see it as, essentially a human AI hybrid coaching system that gives young people that exact value proposition I was saying earlier, like a place to go to set and pursue the goals, the dreams that matter to them, but also a place to go when they just feel like talking to someone, they feel stuck, they feel alone, they feel like they have a decision in front of them, they want to navigate and just need to talk it through, or whatever it might be. They went through a breakup and they don't really know what to do with themselves. Coaching is really powerful, to help you figure out, what do I want for myself right now, and what do I need to do to get there? It's very empowering also, because it's really about starting with what you want and need, as opposed to somebody saying, I think you need this, let's do it. Instead, coaching starts from a place of, what's your goal, what's your agenda, and if you don't know it, that could be the first step, is figuring that out. So we've been building it out. We've been working on it for like basically the past year and a half now. We have just finished an MVP, which we're really excited about. We went through a very exciting and rigorous design process with a team of young people. We have a team of paid, trained young people that works with us on everything. They're like in our Slack. They're great. We're not youth led anymore. So we are youth centered, and we are collaborating with young people all the time. It's just so important, obviously, for every reason that you can imagine. And so we're now, sort of transitioning. It's a really exciting moment, because we're kind of transitioning from the phase of imagining and building to testing, where you go from like, okay, we have to act like we're experts so that we can be creatively confident. And now the phase we're in is about to be like, you're the expert. We're willing to, question the assumptions. Let's see what works, what you like, what's going to feel accessible over time. And then just keep improving and iterating from there. And then with that, there'll be the work of starting up the social media, presence, really offering great coaching content, video-based coaching content to young people on, across all channels, and, both hopefully as a result, delivering them, easy, bite-sized, helpful coaching content, but also getting them inspired to like want to go deeper and talk to a coach, and go from there. So it's an exciting moment. There's still, there's so many lessons from the past we're trying to apply along the way. And, there's still work to do, money to raise, and all that. But hopefully we're doing that now in a way that's more clear-eyed, that we're able to sort of bring in the lessons. Like, there's some really simple seeming lessons, like good sequencing and things that I think, I feel like we're much more equipped now to do well than we were the first time around. And then we'll see, like our dream definitely is to restart in-person programming at some point. It won't look, I'm sure, exactly the same as it did before, just because we learned the limits of that model. And there's a lot of things I think we can take from what we've done in the past and deliver in a more scalable, or just more sustainable, let's just say it that way. Especially I think building a tech-enabled product, like the possibility of growth, access, scale is just so much greater over time, that it actually takes some of the burden off of the in-person work. Like, that doesn't have to be, you always want it to be sustainable. You always want it to be able to grow enough that if somebody wants it, they can have it. But it doesn't have to, like, the goal, like we now can have offerings at multiple price points and at multiple access points, so that if you want to get support as a young person, or as a person who cares about a young person and wants to offer them support in some way, you can do it in multiple forms and multiple price points, and meeting young people in multiple ways, on their phone, at school, maybe in their communities, maybe at work, over time, so that they can get surrounded by the support that they need and deserve.
So I'm struck by a couple things. I mean, I'm thinking about the beginning of our conversation and, how, powerful it was for the Future Project to start with so much energy. Maybe not, it wasn't like the way it was
Yeah.
built wasn't sustainable, but also like when you start things for the first time, like that's often how it goes, right?
Yeah.
It's, it's like this whole notion of, you know, it's okay to build things that don't scale in the beginning, right?
Yes.
That's where you
Yeah.
learn everything, right? That's sort of like the classic Airbnb
Yes.
sort of model, is to build things that don't scale. And you all did that. And it sounds like what you've done is you've taken the best of version 1.0, right? And now there's this incredible opportunity to scale it, right? In a way that is really powerful. I'm thinking about the benefits not only through schools and through homes, but just to be able to flood social media with something that does feel fundamentally different than what I think young people now have access to, right? When
Yeah.
they're sort of on the interwebs. My question for you is, I was also really struck by how you describe the role of the coach, right? As in sort of starting with encouraging young people to start with what they need first.
Yes.
And I'm also juxtaposing that in some ways
Yeah.
with the story that, we've sort of told to you've told, here about the different moments where maybe you didn't do that for yourself,
Yeah.
right? Where you started with what the team needed first, with what the company needs first, but maybe not always, what you needed. You
Yeah.
needed first. And so in this new version, in this 2.0, how are you planning to, put that question for yourself?
Yeah.
And to really to live into that is also one of the lessons moving forward.
Yeah, I really it's really powerful that you picked up on that because well, I think on multiple things. I think on the product level, they not only do they say build things that don't scale at least at first, they also say build things that you would actually use and benefit
Mm.
from and to your point, I think that I mentioned this as we were talking, but I I think there were many things I like knew intellectually that I didn't always practice fully in my own for myself. I almost like it wasn't intentional. I wasn't like, "Oh, I'm exempt for this from this," but I didn't take the time to apply to myself in the way that I believed was important for others. And I there were consequences of that. And so I think in many ways, I might try to apply that to myself from like making sure that I have a coach and a therapist and like so I have people besides of course my beautiful family and my partner like I always have my people but like having people who's like whose role is to be like an unbiased just supporter of my goals and my dreams and making taking my own medicine in that way I think is well it's like eating my own ice cream or something it's not medicine um but to have that for myself first and foremost to prioritize things honestly, like, working out, to prioritize like, spending time with people, friends who are not the people I work with. Not to say that I don't have really, really strong and wonderful friendships with people that are working with me. I value those deeply. And we all know it's important for that to not be your only source of social stimulation. So that's been really important, so I think there's a lot of things just in my own life and I think one thing that I think Gen Z is really trying to teach us millennials is like there's a value to the grind but like the value ends somewhere
Right.
and like I think like that's a big lesson that again I would have said it I would have intellectually been like yeah of course like being busy is like not the most important but I was not acting that way I was like no like I need to work until I can't anymore. And then I need to sleep for whatever time I can. And then I need to get up and do it all over again. And, I was joyful in spirit as I was doing it, but it was like exhausting, and some weekends I was like, I don't want to work, but I need to, like, so I also just give myself space, to like take Saturdays off and like most of Sunday and like, unless if something really big's happening and I want to dive in more for some period of time, or if there is a challenge, or if I need to, sure. But I do that with purpose and intention rather than because it's like the only option.
Mhm.
So I think that's really important is like really practicing what I preach, practicing what our product preaches. And I think it's made me better. I think it's made me better equipped to do my job, but I think it's also made me better at my job, because I think I have a better understanding, honestly, of
Mm.
coaching and of, what, when we talk about this youth mental health crisis, of course, part of that is making sure young people have access to therapeutic interventions, to therapy, to psychiatry, whatever they need, to crisis support. And like, that's not future coach. Future coach is for all the other moments. It's for you to be able to think about, what do I want, and think about your present and your future, not as much your past, even though of course that's there too. Um and so for me personally, to have a little bit more perspective has helped me to, guide our product, and to be even more realistic, about what people need, to be healthy and fulfilled. And of course, like, I don't just know that because of my own experience, like, but I'm just saying that my experience,
Yeah.
has, I think, helped me to develop a more nuanced and hopefully sophisticated understanding of just human need, and then of course there are experts and there are young people and there are others that are helping to apply that, specifically to our population. But yeah, I just hope I hope that I definitely feel, I'll say it this way, I feel like a fuller, like more alive version of me, which
Mhm.
is which I value so much, because you know, one of our advisors, like longtime advisors, board members, Tim Shriver, wrote a book called Fully Alive. And I just like love that concept. Like, that's what I want for myself, for everyone I love, for everyone. I want, like, to be able to feel and be fully alive, whatever that means, whatever your circumstances, to have that power and agency to live with joy and intention and passion and purpose. Like that is the ultimate gift and privilege. And it's something that I've always tried to, yeah, it's like what success I feel like can look like for me, but I hope for everyone over time. And so to feel like that more, and to be able to know that part of it is because of mistakes I made, and because of failure I experienced, and because of, the very intentional work that I tried to do after that to learn and grow from it, feels good. And it makes me feel like hopeful too about the future, my future, you know, um, and of course, what is possible for others when they also have the kind of support that, I was lucky to have over time.
That's great. Where can people find you, Kanya? How can they follow you?
I'm not a big social media person, but I'm like on LinkedIn. I can be emailed at any time, Kanya@futurecoach.org. And you can sign up on the futurecoach.org website. You can put your email address in. It's just a landing page right now. But you can sign up to get updates as the app. We're still in a testing phase, but we'll be in the App Store and everything soon. So you can sign up to get info about that. We also have, there's still a site up on the futureproject.org, and you can reach us, there too. But yeah, I'm very grateful that I am able to share some of this learning and this journey, because hopefully no one's going through exactly what we went through. It was awful, but everyone's going through something, and people will go through things. And especially when you're a leader, like, there are things you're going to experience that you wish you didn't have to. And so I hope that, um, what I was able to share can offer just a little bit even of guidance, or just that feeling of, I'm not the only one who's ever gone through this, that I wish I had when I was going through it.
Thank you, Kanya.